I want to give you just a little game plan for today. I'm going to start out by talking about just some foundational truths that I think that we have to start with. And then we're going to talk about God's design for marriage, and that'll be the first session. And then the second session, we're going to talk about how come maybe God doesn't seem like that for me. I mean, what did I just say? Wow. How come sex doesn't seem like that for me? Okay? And then we're going to talk about how do we create what God wants for us. Okay? So that's kind of our game plan. There are a couple of foundational truths that I think we need to hang on to. And the first one comes out of Song of Songs. Song of Songs is, it's this amazing book, really almost in the middle of the Bible. And it's so unlike any other book in the Bible, isn't it? Like you read Song of Songs and you're like, what the heck? Like how in the world did that get there? Who let that in? Okay? Because it makes no sense that it's there. And yet it is there. And I'm going to ask my husband Jim to come up, and we're going to just read a passage out of it. And this is chapter 1, verse 12 through chapter 2, verse 6. And he's going to read the guy's part, and I'm going to read the girl's part. So I get to start. While the king was at his table, my perfume spread his fragrance. My beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh resting between my breasts. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms from the vineyards of En-Gedi.
How beautiful you are, my darling. How beautiful. Your eyes are doves.
How handsome you are, my beloved. Oh, how charming. And our bed is verdant.
The beams of our house are cedars. Our rafters are firs.
I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys.
Like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women.
Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. Strengthen me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I'm faint with love. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. And so this back and forth passage between Solomon and his bride. So we're going to make this interactive today because that's how I do stuff. I think you learn more if you guys answer. So what do you notice about this man and this woman in their interaction? They're in love with each other. They're tender. Edifying each other. Think about this. Think about the roles of women in society, in culture 3,000 years ago. And what was the role of women back then? Like mothers, housewives, very much back in the background, probably not equals at all in society. Like very much, like they probably, I'm guessing, hardly said anything between men and women, right? And yet, in these passages, like she is equally forthright, she's equally verbalizing, equally expressing her desire. I think God is saying something huge here. I mean, it's just this huge contrast between what it was like in society and what it was like within the confines of the marriage bed. Husbands and wives are supposed to be equals, okay? And it's not that we're the same. Like men and women are different. The way that our bodies work are different. The way that, as far as having a drive, we operate different. But just because we're different doesn't mean that sex isn't just as important for each one of us. Okay? And so that's what we start out with is yes, we understand that we're different, but we understand that within God's design, it is equally important for both of us. Okay? The second thing, I should probably point out too, you were talking about Oasis. This is the verse right here. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms from the vineyards of En-Gedi. En-Gedi is an oasis in the middle of the desert, right? Marriage, intimacy is supposed to be an oasis in the middle of the desert. Okay? That's what this is. Okay, so my second foundational truth that's really important to hang on to comes out of Ephesians 5:31 through 32. And I'm going to read this to you. And it's this weird verse. It says, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. The two will become one, Christ and the church." And I would even take it so far as, like people would say, well, marriage is a picture of the intimacy that we have with Christ. I would take it further. I would. It says the two become one. I would say that sex, the intimacy that we create during sex, is a picture of the intimacy that Christ wants with us. And I've read just a ton of books on sex, both Christian and secular books. And there's a million different opinions out there. And this is one of the things that I measure everything against. Let me give you a couple of examples. I think this society would tell you that marriage is going to just get boring. I think society would tell you that sex is just going to get boring. Like it will, because you've been married a million years, so it's just going to get boring. Okay, so if you compare this to your relationship with Christ, okay? And there may be those times, like early when you become a Christian, when you're on fire, right? Okay? And early in marriage where, like, you're on fire, okay? And then it may be different. Like, it's not on fire like that, but if we're growing in our relationship with Christ, and we're growing, and we're growing, and we're growing, shouldn't it get better and better and not boring? Okay? Now, in our marriage, in our sex life, if we are growing in our sex life, if we are getting to know each other through sex, it may not be the same as it was when we were first married, but shouldn't it get better and better and better? And shouldn't people that have been having sex for 30 or 40 years shouldn't they have better sex than they had when they were married 3 years? Okay? And that's truth because of Ephesians 5:31 through 32. Okay? And so there are a lot of lies out there. Let me give you another one. I think there are a lot of, especially Christian sex books that would say, you need to have sex for your husband. Like, he needs sex, otherwise he's going to, like, have challenges straying, and he's going to have challenges keeping his eyes pure, or he's just going to explode, right? Because he needs to release at least 3 times a week. Like, I think we read those things. You need to have sex for your husband, okay? Yeah, like, it can be harder for a husband, but if you look at your relationship with Christ, like, God does not want you just, like, going through the motions and saying, okay, well, I read my Bible today. I prayed today. Okay, I read my Bible today. I prayed today. Like, he's much more interested in our heart than in our checklist. Okay? And so the same thing is true in sex. If we're just going through the motions, then is it, like, real, true connection, and it doesn't mean that much? Or is our spouse really much more interested in our heart than in us just having sex with them because we know we're supposed to do it at least a couple of times a week? Okay, and so it's about the heart. It is not about a checklist. And if it feels like a checklist, like, we need to figure out what that is, and we need to work on it. I'll probably just one last example on this, and it's kind of similar, is that it's very easy to get into a pattern of bartering, like, well, if you just do this for me, then I'll do this for you. And yet God doesn't barter with us, right? He doesn't, you do this for me, I'll love you. Like he doesn't barter with us. Okay? And the same is true in sex. Not like, if you talk to me, then I'll have sex with you. Or if you help me around the house more, I'll have sex with you. Or if you have sex with me, I'll talk to you. Because it goes the opposite way too. Okay? And so we don't barter with each other. Because Christ doesn't barter with us. Okay? And so that's like just a huge thing. When you're reading sex books, whether they're Christian or secular, you need to measure it against this, because there's all kinds of information out there that does not line up with our relationship with Christ. Okay? Okay. So those are two things that we're going to hang on to. One is that we need to be equal partners in the marriage bed, and the second thing is we need to measure everything against our relationship with Christ. Okay, so we're going to talk about God's design for sex. And I'm not going to... Procreation, obviously, right? And we're going to talk besides procreation. So the first thing is that God designed sex for oneness, for the two of us to become one. And I know we read these verses last night. So this is Genesis 2:24. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and he is united to his wife and they become one flesh. So, I think Christians kind of like to just toss words out. Like we do. Like we have these terms. We become one. And I think it's important to what does that mean? We become one. So let's interact here a little bit. How does sex make us into one? Come on, you guys. Huh? Yeah. So physically, we become one, right? Our bodies interlocked. Emotionally, you talked about. So, and I think that sometimes sex makes us into one. Like in ways that we can't even explain. I think that becoming one through sex is this mysterious thing that God does, whether we want him to or not. And we hear this in conversations about purity quite often. You got all those illustrations in youth group. You got a red piece of construction paper, you got a green piece of construction paper. You put some glue between the two of them. That's sex. Okay? And then you peel it apart, and somehow you've left part of one piece of construction paper on the other piece of the construction paper because of the sex, because of the glue. Okay? Now, we know it in purity, but do we really know it in marriage? Because somehow I think we get the concept of, and we became one, it's just this one-time thing. We got married, we had sex, and so God made us into one. No, I think it's every single time we have sex, God makes us into one again, over and over and over and over. And I've had women that have taken the class that have shared, after we talked about this, that their husband reached for them times when they thought, like we're in the middle of a disagreement here. What are you thinking about? And yet they realized, oh my gosh, this is a way that God makes us into one. And so they entered into that. And after they had sex, they still had things that they needed to work through. And yet afterwards, they didn't seem quite so complicated to work through. They were much easier to work through. And so in some mysterious way, God makes us into one through sex. And I can't explain how it happens. But it happens. I think that sometimes sex maybe communicates things to each other that words cannot communicate. Okay? Now, here's another thing that you'll read all the time in marriage books. A woman needs to be emotionally connected in order to have sex with her husband. A husband needs to have sex in order to emotionally connect or talk to her husband, right? Like we read that in books. Did I say that wrong? To his wife, thank you. We read that in marriage books, and intuitively we go, yeah, like that's totally how it is. Now that might be what comes naturally to us. That may be naturally how we're made. But maybe it's in those times that we're supposed to stretch and not be how we're naturally made. Like, do we have to be all put together before we can come to God? Or are we supposed to come to God even when we're in the midst of disagreement and confusion and brokenness? Now, I think this is something that men intuitively get much better than women. Because I know that I can remember times when my husband would reach for me when maybe we were kind of in the midst still of disagreement, and I'm thinking, what the heck are you thinking? Are you kidding? Like, what are you thinking? Like, we haven't worked this out yet. But is it possible that my husband got this so much better than me? And he knew in the midst of our disconnection that if he reached for me and we came together and became one, if in essence he loved me through that this was something that God was going to help us get through. Okay? And yet, I think women have been so trained to think that our husband just wants sex. Because of culture, because of what culture has told us about men, that when our husband reaches for us in the midst of disagreement, we're thinking, how can you be thinking about sex right now? How come, like, you just want sex? You just need a physical release right now? No. Like maybe he hates that you're disconnected, and he just wants to pull you back through becoming one. Okay? Okay. The second reason God created sex is to know each other. And in the King James Version, it reads, Genesis 4:1 reads, "And Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain." And so sex is to get to know each other. One of the women at one of my classes shared this illustration. She was married at a Russian wedding. And at the wedding reception, all the women lined up in a row of chairs and took off their shoes and socks. And the groom, they blindfolded the groom, and one by one, he went down the row and felt their feet to try to find his bride. Okay? And so sex is supposed to be this process of getting to know each other. So we can brainstorm again, right? So how do we get to know each other through sex? You guys have to speak up. What? Communication. Like, yeah, you have to talk, and you have to talk about hard things, vulnerable things. How else do you get to know each other through sex? Yeah, touching, just feeling each other, being able to recognize each other's bodies, know how each other's bodies work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of our senses. Do you think you can have sex without getting to know each other? Yeah. I think you can. And I think that, honestly, I think that maybe a lot of couples do. And I think probably that's one of the reasons maybe a lot of women don't like having sex. I think they're bored with sex because maybe they get to this place where, the husband and wife just kind of figure out what's going on, what works, and they just kind of stick with it, and that's their tried and true, and over that just kind of plays out. And after a while, she may become so bored that her body may get to the place where it doesn't even respond very well anymore. And so she begins just kind of fantasizing about something else, thinking about something else in her head, and he's thinking about something else, and they're not even really there together. They're just going through the motions physically together. I think getting to know each other through sex is something that women are much more in tune to. And I'll tell you how this plays out. I mean, this is a scenario that I think a lot of women connect with. Is just like I said, the husband has his routine. He's going through his routine, and in her head, she's thinking, "Here we go again." Yep. Here we go again. I know what's coming next. Now, if he just keeps going through that routine, because he knows his routine, and this is how you get from point A to point B, she just becomes more and more frustrated because he's not even paying attention to whether she's enjoying it. He's not there. He's not sensing her body that is becoming more and more frustrated. But if he's actually there and feeling her, and he goes, "Oh, she's maybe not enjoying this quite so much. Let me try something else." And so he goes a different path. And all of a sudden she goes, "Oh, he's there with me. He's in tune to my body. He is getting to know me. He knows me." And she's right back on board with him. Okay? And so sex is to get to know each other. And we become so focused on just getting from point A to point B, and we go, "Well, I know the way," that we miss out on the entire journey. Okay? Sex is supposed to be this discovery of, what can I find out about my spouse today? Just isn't that how it should be with God? What can I discover about God today? And isn't there always more to know about God? Should that ever, ever, ever get boring? Okay? But we have to be on this journey of getting to know each other. I do an exercise with the guys, and I'm going to have you guys do it right now. So I need everybody to take your right hand, and I want you to just rub your left wrist. Everybody got that? Okay, now I want you to stop. And this time, instead of rubbing your wrist, I want you to feel your wrist. Okay? And I want you to think about feeling the surface of the skin. And I want you to think about feeling underneath the surface of the skin. And sometimes if you leave your fingers even attached to that skin, right, you can and move it with the skin, you can feel underneath the surface even better because you completely eliminate friction. Does that make sense? Okay? Or maybe sometimes you might even feel something different if instead of even moving at all, you just leave your hand still and you just feel underneath. You might pick up a pulse. You might feel a ridge. Okay? So what changed? What's the difference between rubbing and feeling? What changed? What? Discovery, yeah. So you're trying to discover something? Details, you're paying attention to the details? You're engaged? Even just the speed, honestly, right? I think that discovery, details, I think what we do is we take what we feel with our fingertips and we bring it up to our mind. And we think about what we're encountering here, right? And we bring it up to our mind. And I think we can make a map of it, right? And as we make maps, then the next time, if it feels different, we know it. Okay? So we're taking note. Now, we can't learn to read each other's minds. You can't read each other's minds. But I think that we ought to be able to learn each other's bodies. Shouldn't we recognize if our spouse is becoming tense? Shouldn't we recognize if our spouse is becoming more relaxed? Shouldn't we recognize if our spouse is enjoying something? Okay, there's a big difference between rubbing and feeling. And trust me, your wife does not want to be rubbed. We know it. If you are just rubbing us, just get me from this point to this point, just rub a little harder, it'll work. Like, no. Like, we don't want to be rubbed. We want you to discover us. We want you to feel us. Okay? And it's different. Okay? I think, another part of this knowing each other, honestly, is knowing the hard things about sex. And it's not all easy, and it's not just all physical either, right? It's our emotions, it's our hurts, it's our baggage, and Stephen talked about it a little bit last night. But knowing those things that are struggles for us, praying over those hard things, talking about those hard things, like it's that too, okay? And so don't think that it's just physical. Like knowing each other is knowing each other completely, okay? I think that knowing each other through sex is a huge way that we can change our sex lives. I think it's something that we intentionally do, because we can have sex where we're not getting to know each other, and it works for a while. But if you have sex where you're really getting to know each other, like it just gets better and better and better, right? Okay. The third reason that God gave us the gift of sex is as a defense against temptation. And we read this verse last night too, but I'll read it again. This is Proverbs 5:15 through 19. And this is a defense, a warning against adultery. I think it could be, honestly, for either a young man, for either a man or a woman, because there are plenty of women that struggle too. It says, "Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in the public squares, let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be intoxicated with her love." One of the versions that I usually read says, "May you ever be captivated by her love," right? And so sex is a defense against temptation. Now, I think this verse is kind of tough, actually, because, yes, sex is a defense against temptation, but ultimately, if somebody views porn, who's responsible? The person who views it. If somebody has an affair, who's responsible? The person who has the affair. Right? We are responsible for our own actions. And don't let anybody ever tell you that they viewed porn because you were not having sex with them enough. That's a lie. Okay? We are responsible for our own actions. And this verse, I think a lot of people would take this verse and say, well, if you'll just have sex with your spouse 3 times a week, then they're not going to stray. That's a lie, because there are spouses out there trying to have sex, 3 times a week, and their husband's still struggling with porn. Okay, and the thing is that if you're having sex 3 times a week, so your spouse doesn't stray, like, isn't it somehow just becoming this checklist, this to-do list? And is that really what they want? And is that really what this verse says? Because this says, be intoxicated with each other, be captivated with each other. And it's a totally different thing than have sex 3 times a week, okay? And I think about what being captivated by each other is. I like to put this in terms of how my relationship with Christ has changed, actually. Because I remember, 6 years ago, even though I was a Christian, very much feeling like, man, I need to get up and read my Bible, or or I need to start praying, right? It was this to-do list, okay? And that's completely changed where I feel like I'm talking to God all day long. Like if there's no to-do list. We are connecting all day long, okay? And I think that's what God wants in our relationship and marriage too. Instead of this to-do list, like we're supposed to be connecting all the time. We're supposed to be captivating each other, where we're thinking about each other, and we have these blinders on and we don't even see anything else. Okay, that's what it's supposed to be. And so that looks very different than, oh, let me go about my day and, oh, I better have sex. No, like you have this all-day love affair and sex just kind of flows out of it because you're so connected, okay? And so we need to start doing things like all day as far as connection. Now, one of the things that most women, non-sexual touch is like a big deal for us. Like just staying connected, but we can get into really bad patterns with it. Because what happens is we figure out that, well, I don't want to lead my husband on, so I'm not going to let him touch me, except on times when maybe I'm open to having sex. And pretty soon, the only time our husband gets touched is on days we get to have sex. And then pretty soon, our husband starts to figure out, oh, if she's letting me touch her, that means we get to have sex. And then she's thinking, well, I can't let him touch me, otherwise he'll think I want to have sex. And it's this bad cycle, right? Where she's thinking, oh my gosh, if I let him touch me, we'll have to have sex. And pretty soon they're not touching at all. Okay? We need to be able to touch each other all the time without any expectations of sex. Now, women, if you're in this cycle where the two of you have stopped touching each other because of expectations, you may need to have a conversation and say, you know what, like I need to be able to connect with you all the time, whether we're going to have sex that night or not. Okay? You also need to understand if your husband says, yeah, like I understand and that's good, and you know what, tonight if you want me to just hold you, I will just hold you. And if he says that and he gets an erection, he has no control over that. Like it just happens. He's not meaning to poke you. Okay? Okay? And so you need to let that go. He is not reneged on his agreement. Like he truly wants to just hold you. And that's okay. Like he's good. Okay? Don't think that he's reneged on his agreement. He hasn't. The other thing that I would say about this whole non-sexual touching thing is, especially when we get it into patterns, and it's typically a lot of times with young moms, right, where we're not letting our husbands touch us, otherwise they think that they'll get to have sex. It gets to the point where husbands are not being touched anytime except when they're going to have sex. And so can you imagine that a husband that thinks he's starved for sex may actually be just starved for any kind of touch at all, because he's not getting touched by anybody anytime except when he has sex. Why wouldn't he want sex? Because that's the only time he gets touched. And so this non-sexual touch is not just important for the wives, it's important for the husbands. Okay? And so that's part of this all-day love affair that you need to look at. There are lots of things involved with that as far as just connecting with each other, thinking about each other, but sex is not supposed to be the separate thing. It's supposed to roll out of an all-day love affair. We're supposed to be captivated with each other. That's the defense against temptation. Okay. We're going to read, Jim, you want to come up? We're going to read Song of Songs, chapter 4, verse 11, through chapter 5, verse 1. And this is their wedding night. And I like to say he knows how to woo her with his words. So Jim's going to read the guy's part, and I will read the girl's part.
Your lips drop sweetness as honeycomb, my bride. Milk and honey are under your tongue. The fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. You are a garden locked up, my sister, my bride. You are a spring enclosed and sealed, a sealed fountain. Your plants are an orchard of pomegranates with choice fruits, with henna and nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, and every kind of incense tree, with myrrh and aloes, and all the finest spices. You are a garden fountain, a well of flowing water streaming down from Lebanon.
Awake, north wind, and come, south wind. Blow in my garden, that his fragrance may spread everywhere. Let my beloved come into his garden and taste its choice fruit.
I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk.
Eat, friends, and drink. Drink your fill of love. Okay, so this is the wedding night. And, that last section that I read, eat, friends, and drink your fill of love. That is, it's designated as the friends part, but actually a lot of people think that that is God. That is saying, eat, friends, and drink. Drink your fill of love. And it is drink your fill to the point of intoxication. That's what that is. That is, get drunk on each other. That is, don't hold back. I think maybe especially women, we have this connection with overindulgence, with sin. Like you can have one glass of wine, but don't have 10, right? And this is saying, have as much as you want. Drink your fill. Don't hold back. And I think Christian women, I think a lot of us hold back. Maybe it's just a little too much, or it's too, I don't know, is that okay? Because there's this connection with sin, with bad stuff out there, and we think, well, I don't know if that's okay. No, God says, drink your fill, within the boundaries of the marriage bed. Enjoy it all. And so I just think women especially may need to constantly ask ourselves, am I holding myself back from a good gift from God? From a gift from God. Am I holding myself back? The last one I'm going to talk about is that sex is supposed to be a comfort or a refreshment. There's a verse, Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 2. She says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine." I think about what a glass of wine does. And, you had a hard day, you finally get the kids in bed, you're done with work, and the dishes are done, and you sit on the couch and just a little glass of wine, and you think, oh, finally I can relax, right? That's what this is saying. Except it's our spouse connecting with each other, kissing each other, becoming one is supposed to be, that's supposed to be refreshment. And yet, I think a lot of us women, maybe especially, feel like it's this, sex is this one more thing that's going to suck the life out of us, and it's going to take energy from us. And why is it so much work? And why is it so hard? And instead of thinking of becoming one is going to be this way that fills us up, we think, do I have enough energy to do this? And yet God wants sex to be a way to fill us up, which is kind of opposite than what we feel. And so we're going to spend some time when we come back talking a little bit maybe about why some of those ideas happen. I'm going to read you another verse. It's 2 Samuel 12:24. And this is after David and Bathsheba have lost their child. It says, "Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and made love to her. She gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon." And so sex is supposed to be a way that we comfort each other. Has anybody ever experienced sex as a comfort? Would somebody be willing to share? I'll share a couple I've heard in class. I've had women that have talked about comforting their husband after he's lost a job, and he just feeling awful and just knew that this was a way that they could love their husband. I've had women that have talked about losing a child, and that their husband just so very, very tenderly reached for them, and that was a comfort. I would say that for me, one of the first times I experienced this was when I first started teaching classes 5 years ago. I would just be racked with insecurities that night of, what the heck are you doing? What are you thinking? And the only way that I could get that to go away was by connecting with my husband, and to know that he was in this with me. I think that a lot of times we think as sex typically maybe as a comfort for our husbands, like this is a great way that I'm going to serve my husband, and it is. But I would challenge you women that like sex is supposed to be a comfort for us. This is David comforting his wife Bathsheba. And I would say that it is not only in the big things, but it ought to be in the small things. And I know, at least for myself, on days when I was stressed out, I would stiff arm my husband and I would say, like, just let me figure this out. And once I get all this figured out, then, right? Because I just could not even imagine that. And yet, if sex is a way that we love each other, is it possible that coming together during those times was a way that my husband simply wanted to love me through that hard situation? And I don't think it's a natural place for women to go a lot of times. And I know that they get God's design for sex when they get this, because I think this is a huge deal. That when we are broken, that's when we come together as one and we say, we are in this together. When we are broken, that's when we go to God and we say, God, help me through this, right? It's the same thing. And so sex is for comfort and for refreshment. We got about 15 minutes, right? So when we come back, we're going to spend some time trying to decipher why maybe sex doesn't quite line up with this. Like, why doesn't sex feel like a comfort? Why does it feel like one more thing on my to-do list? Why does it feel, I don't know, boring? Okay? And so we're going to spend some time with that. And during the break, what I want you to do is connect with at least 5 people that are the same sex as you. So women are going to be talking to women, and men are going to be talking to men. Okay? And I want you to ask 2 questions. One is, how did you learn about sex? Okay? That's interesting to think about. How did you learn about sex? And maybe not just like how babies are made, but how did you actually learn about sex? Okay? And then the second thing is, are there any lies that, like, can you think of any lies about sex? And they might be lies from media about sex, like about sex outside of marriage, or about sex inside of marriage, or they might be lies about men and sex, and they may be lies about women and sex, or anything in between. Or they may be lies from a church about sex, okay? Because there hasn't always been good information in church. Or they may be lies from your family about sex, okay? But we're going to, when we come back, then we'll kind of process some of those together. But I want you to spend some time just brainstorming together. We're going to play a video about my classes, and then I'm going to spend just a little bit of time sharing about classes. A lot of women are bored with sex. You know, if we did get a message about sex, it was, how to make a baby.
Well, like we talk about, we have sex this many times. This many times is how to make a baby. And so what is the rest of this about? People have preconceived ideas about what this class is about. They maybe think that it's another Christian sex class where they don't give you any answers.
It's not just the message of serve your husband. So in 6 weeks through the Awaken Love class, we go from understanding God's design for intimacy and sex to getting rid of the lies and the baggage that are holding us back and stealing our joy, to really understanding the nuts and bolts of sex. How does my body work? How does my husband's body work? And how are they supposed to work together? To understanding how sex can be a means of really getting to know our husbands. And
the class is kind of this unique opportunity to bring up the topic of sex, because you're not bringing it up because there's an issue or there's something wrong. You're bringing it up because you're talking about it in class and you're supposed to do this homework.
you know, women come to the Awaken Love class with a good marriage and leave with a great marriage. Or sometimes they come in pretty desperate and hopeless, and they leave with this renewed faith that God can heal them and that He can bring wholeness to their marriage. I know somebody who took the class last fall and then told a couple of her friends, you have to take this. It's not what you're expecting it to be. Women leave saying, I'm so thankful my church is willing to talk about this, that they're brave enough to put this discussion out there because it's impacted their marriage so deeply.
So I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the class, and then I'll have a table out here if you have questions, and there's actually going to be a sign-up sheet. And so if you're interested in taking a class, then we'll have a list of women that you can contact to do that. The classes you can take using videos now, and basically just takes a facilitator that is comfortable just creating a safe environment and praying with women. I've seen 500 women go through this class now, and it is amazing to see the transformation that women have made. And I just think about a class that I had just this last January. There was a woman the first week that was visibly pretty uncomfortable, and later she told me, she said after that first week, she said, I really thought, I'm going to just email Ruth and say, I don't think this is for me. By week 3, when we were going around the room sharing our baggage, the things that have impacted us in our sex life, she said, I was a virgin when I got married. I followed all the rules, and I got married, and sex was awful. And I had bad messages about sex, and I just kept doing it for my husband's sake. And I became more and more resentful and more bitter. And she said, I told my husband, find a sitter for the kids because we need to talk. And she said, I need to repent because I need to work on this. Like, I need to work on this for us. I need to work on this for me. This is important for us. And I want us to have a good sex life again. And by week 6, as she was sharing what had changed in her marriage from the class, she said, it's funny. She said, we used to do everything separate. She said, we just he had his stuff he did, I had my stuff that I did, we took care of the kids, and we kind of very much had separate lives. And she said, all of a sudden now we want to do things together. And so figuring out their sex life did not just impact their sex life, like it impacted their entire marriage. I had one woman that took the class the first year, and we were talking about creating intimacy through praying together with our spouse and things like that. And she said, I cannot imagine that. She says, I can hardly get my husband to come to church. And then a week later she said, I've decided I'm gonna just love my husband this way. Like, I'm gonna just love him fully. And a couple weeks later he starts showing up at church. And then he's at church every week. And then he's going on a mission trip that summer to Africa. And it opened him up. Her loving him through sex opened him up to who God is. And he's just a quiet, very introverted man that several times has come up and thanked me and said, just thank you. Like, you don't know how you've changed my life. And that was through his wife taking the class. I also had a woman that just recently I think about, actually he had spent a lifetime struggling with pornography, fairly young couple, and was in the midst of still battling it, like it was hard for him. She actually had spent a lifetime struggling erotica, which is basically written pornography, right? And struggling with that and trying to let loose of that. And I think that both of them kind of felt like, why is this so hard, and what's broken with us, and what's wrong with us? And I just encouraged her, God created men to be visual. And that is a good thing. That is God's creation. And God created women to be aroused by words. Like, that's what Song of Songs is. Like, their whole wedding night, he just brings her along with his words. And God created women to be aroused by words, and that is a good thing. That is God's creation. And so instead of trying to deny that part of ourselves, what we need to do is take that part of ourselves and create it in our marriage bed. And so she was beginning to use her words and spin stories and create arousal through her words in their marriage bed. An awesome thing. And she was, and the two of them were beginning to just become more and more free in letting him feast his eyes on her, right? Like, this is a good thing. It works so great in marriage. This is God's design for a woman to have this deep, deep desire to feel beautiful and to have a husband that goes, oh, wow, right? That's God's good design. And that a husband, as he's feasting his eyes on his wife, shares what's in his head and says it out loud to her. Man, you look so beautiful, right? And she needs to hear that, men. Okay, that is God's good design. And so we are not broken. We need to take what maybe has been twisted out here and create it together in our marriage bed. That is getting to know each other. Even our words, even our eyes, all of that, right? It's all of us. It's not just touch, okay? So the classes, I have 4 more minutes. The classes, like I said, you can take them on videos now, and it's just set up so that groups of women can take them, anywhere from just like 2 women to 15, and it's all sign up online and through the website. And I'm going to be around, and if you have any questions, you can come and ask me. This next session, we're going to talk about, kind of talk about why sex doesn't feel like that for me, and then I'm going to talk about how to have the sex life that God desires for us, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions too.